So as of a few hours ago, the shortlist for the Women's Prize of Nonfiction has been announced, and I have to say I'm a little disappointed. And some people might be over the moon. It depends on the kind of nonfiction that you enjoy. I will say I love history and I love sociology and memoirs, and I'm not a big fan of science, and I'm not a big fan of some of the like super political ones. There's some books that I'm very sad that are not on here, and there are some that I'm really happy are. I don't know how much of the reading of this list I'm going to do. I was planning on kind of trying to read as many of the shortlist as I could, but my library does not have a lot of them, and many of them appear to not be in audiobook at all, and especially when it comes to nonfiction, I tend to read audiobooks, and I couldn't even find versions of the audiobook elsewhere. I'm going to start from the beginning of the books that I'm most excited to read, and then I'm going to go to the bottom of the books that I'm definitely not going to read. And the first one is How to Say Babylon, and this is an author that I've been really excited to read for a really long time. She has a poetry collection called Cannibal that I have been really wanting to read and my library does not have. So yes, she is a Jamaican poet, and this is her memoir about her childhood, her experience, especially of like the kind of pressures that were put on her as a young woman, and also like her mother's love of literature and many other aspects as well, and just kind of finding her own identity. And I'm really, really excited for this. I love memoirs, and everything that I've heard about her makes me feel like I will especially love her memoir. The next book that I'm really excited for, and I have out from the library, so I will be reading it soon, is All That She Carried. And this is a family history of a Black family, and it begins with this sack that this woman who's escaping from slavery has, and then it traces her family throughout the decades as they kind of look at the things that she carried. And I think that this is such an evocative title that really holds the like pressure that was put on people's backs and on the legacy of slavery and of racism in America, and I'm really excited to read it. It came out in the US and Canada, I think 2 years ago, and it has been on my list since then, so I'm really excited to have this prize as like a catapult for me really wanting to read it. It's A Flat Place by Noreen Masood, and this is about a British Pakistani author, and she is having like a memoir of her own experiences of growing up in Britain but being Pakistani, and really talking about why flat places kind of get a bad rep. Why don't they get celebrated in the same way mountains and hills do? And I kind of love looking at the ways in which we are sentimental or personal about different landscapes or worlds or cities and things like that, and also kind of looking at their history in the common consciousness. I think that'll be really interesting to look into. So yes, I'm really hoping that my library gets it. If you have read this book and would recommend it, I would love to hear your thoughts. So we are at number 4, and this is the last book that I'm really excited that got in, and it is Thunderclap. This is a book that looks at art and artists who have come to near death. Laura Cummings is kind of looking at her father who died young as a painter, but she's also looking at 17th century artists and the ways in which their lives were cut short through a great explosion, and I think that'll be really cool. I love the history of art, and I love the history of just the ways in which art was made and we think about art and all of those elements. So I'm really excited to be able to get a copy of this and to read it and to review it. And the last 2 books on the shortlist I'm not excited for at all. The first one is Codependent: Living in the Shadow of AI. I know that everyone and their cousin and their sister and their mother-in-law are obsessed with talking about AI. I'm just not. Like, I understand that it's a conversation for the present day, but it's not something that I want to read a book about at all. So no interest. The last one is Doppelganger, and this is about a woman who is often mistook for like a far-right woman, and she goes in and learns about their stories and the ways in which we talk about things online. And this is another topic that I've been bombarded with the reality and with living in, and I have no desire to read about. So this is a book that I figured, would make the long list. I figured would make the short list, and I really hope doesn't win. I think that I do have some biases here because I don't like reading nonfiction books that are as contemporary, because they do just feel like there's not the whole picture. And I know that we need to talk about contemporary issues, but I would almost always rather read from the point of view of historical context and like kind of fully understand. And there's other ways of understanding contemporary issues. And maybe that's just my own biases and I'm 100% wrong. I find that like books take a while to be written, they take a while to be developed and a while to be published, and they almost always feel completely out of date when you're trying to stay modern. And I think there's also something that really can bother me about like something that feels like it's really capitalizing on the moment. And I'm not saying that these authors are doing that. It's just, it feels like if you look back on this prize, are these books going to feel relevant in 5 years, in 2 years, in 10 years? Who knows? And maybe it is about capturing this exact moment in time. But I always feel more wary about books that have such a small window of knowledge, because the way that politics are going to be talked about in a few years will be very different. Like, we can look 5 years ago and think about, wow, politics were really different then. And then we can also look at the aspect of you know, AI, it looked really different 5 years ago and it will look really different in 5 more years. So maybe that's why I just have a bee in my bonnet about these topics and I just have no desire to read about them. And I know that I am in the minority when it comes to this. And maybe there is some snobbery or some, you know, lack of reality that I have a really high focus on history. But I think that like history and having these conversations about the ways that these aspects are in history can illuminate the future. And sometimes when we're trying to be writing about the present in such a present day moment, we actually lose focus of what's happening. It can be easier to see things in retrospect than it can be in present day. So on that topic, I will talk about some of the books that I really hoped were going to make it. I did not read any of these, but I was hoping to read some of them. One of them is Intervals, and this is talking about a woman whose mother has MS. We have Wifedom, which is talking about like the way that George Orwell treated his wife and their relationship. We have Shadows, which is looking at South Asia in the 20th century. This is so long, but it feels like a book that would be like right down my alley, like looking at the 20th century in retrospect because we can see it in retrospect. Some People Need Killing. This is a more modern book, but it is something that has still had a little bit time to breathe, and we can talk about the like ways that that ricochets through history and why we need to talk about this. We have The Dictionary People, which is just a classic history book that really talks about people who made the English Oxford Dictionary, which I think is really cool. We have Young Queens, which is looking at several 15th century queens, and I think that that's really cool. We have The Britannicas, which is a book that is looking at Britain throughout the ages, and we have Matricine, which is looking at menopause and women's bodies and how that has been interpreted and how that can be in the future. I think this is a very powerful book that is looking at a contemporary issue, but also in the lens of the past. It's not something that just came into topic, but something that is really relevant to many, many women and a really under-talked about aspect of women's bodies and science. So those are some of the books that I have wished would make the shortlist. If you think that I'm being salty, if you think that I'm being wronged, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and I will see you next time with a happier state of mind.